David's world was a universe of precise, multilingual code, but it was the blunt red ink on the hospital bill that spoke the only language he truly feared. The quiet, rhythmic hum of his daughter Lily's nebulizer was the soundtrack to his late-night translations, a constant reminder of the stakes behind every German pharmaceutical report and Chinese manufacturing log he deciphered. He was one of the few people on Earth who could bridge the gap between these two technical worlds. Yet he couldn't bridge the gap between his income and his daughter's next treatment. But on this night, an email would arrive that promised a solution, though it would demand he translate something far more dangerous than words. He was about to discover that the price of his daughter's life might be his own silence.
This is TS Simple Serene Stories. Before we get back to this touching story, I have a quick question for you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that humanity and miracles are eternal, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get back to the story.
The air in David's house was a layered history of their life, a compound of aging paper from the books that lined every wall, the faint, sterile scent of rubbing alcohol, and the ever-present sweet smell of the albuterol that misted from his daughter's nebulizer. Its quiet, rhythmic hum was the soundtrack to his life, a soft metronome counting out the seconds he spent translating the world for a living, while his own world slowly shrank to the size of this cluttered row house in South Philadelphia. He sat at his desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating the weary lines around his eyes. On the screen was a German patent application for a new industrial solvent, its dense technical language a fortress he had to patiently dismantle, word by word, for a client who would pay him just enough to keep the lights on for another month. "Papa?" David turned. Lily stood in the doorway of her small bedroom, the plastic mask of the nebulizer dangling from her hand. Her small frame was swallowed by an oversized t-shirt, but her eyes were bright and alert. "All done?" he asked, his voice softer than the one he used for his work. She nodded, holding up a piece of paper. "I found a new one." He smiled, leaning back as she padded over to him. She presented the drawing with a flourish. It was a sketch of their street, the familiar brick facades of the houses rendered in wobbly but loving detail. Lily's finger, small and determined, tapped on the wall of their own house. "See?" she whispered, her breath still catching slightly. "Right there in the bricks." He had to lean in close to see it. Tucked into the crosshatch pattern of the brickwork, so small it was almost invisible, was a tiny, smiling face. It was her secret game, a habit she developed over the long, quiet afternoons. She found hidden things, faces in the clouds, shapes in the water stains on the ceiling, patterns in the cracks of the pavement, and recorded them in her sketchbook. It was her way of translating the mundane into something magical. "I see it," David said, his heart aching with a familiar mix of love and fear. "You have the best eyes, Lilybug." He scooped her up, her light weight a fragile comfort in his arms, and carried her back to bed. As he tucked her in, his gaze fell on the kitchen counter. There, amidst a small stack of mail, was the envelope from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it said. The stark, red-lettered past due was a language that needed no translation. The next morning, the phone call came. The voice on the other end was relentlessly cheerful. A woman from the billing department named Brenda, who spoke with the practiced empathy of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I'm just calling about the down payment for Lily's treatment scheduled for the 21st. "I know," David said, staring at the peeling paint on the windowsill. "I'm working on it. Of course, we just need to have the co-payment of $4,000 confirmed at least 72 hours prior to the procedure." Her tone was apologetic, but the message was absolute. It was a wall he couldn't get over. $4,000 might as well have been $1 million. He spent the rest of the day in a haze of quiet desperation, sending out feelers for new projects, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a frantic energy. The German solvent patent was finished, but the payment wouldn't clear for weeks. He was trapped. That evening, as the sun bled out over the rooftops of South Philly, an email landed in his inbox. The subject line was simple: Translation Project, Thorn Enterprises. He almost deleted it. Thorn Enterprises was the stuff of legends, the corporate empire of Marcus Thorn, the city's most celebrated self-made millionaire and philanthropist. It was out of his league, but curiosity, or perhaps desperation, made him click. The email was from a top-tier corporate headhunter. It was concise, professional, and utterly transformative. Thorn Enterprises required a translator for a short-term, high-urgency project. The work was on-site, the hours were long, and the non-disclosure agreement was described as ironclad. And the pay, listed at the bottom of the email, made him stop breathing. It was more than he had made in the last 6 months combined. It was enough for Lily's treatment, with enough left over to give them a cushion for the first time in years. Then came the requirements, and he understood. The project required an expert with C2 level proficiency in both technical German and Mandarin, specifically for documents pertaining to pharmaceutical research and chemical manufacturing. It was a bizarre, almost impossible combination of skills. It was David's exact peculiar specialty, the one he had honed during a promising but ultimately failed academic career. He wasn't just a candidate. He was likely one of the only candidates on the East Coast. He had been headhunted not by chance, but by necessity. The decision was no decision at all. The ironclad NDA, the on-site requirement, it all faded away against the stark reality of the hospital bill on his counter. He typed his reply, his hands steady for the first time all day. He accepted. The next day, David found himself standing before a gleaming skyscraper in Rittenhouse Square, a world away from the crumbling brick and worn-out charm of his neighborhood. The lobby of Thorn Enterprises was a cathedral of glass and steel, silent and intimidating. A silent elevator whisked him to the penthouse floor, its doors opening directly into Marcus Thorn's private office. The room was vast and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Philadelphia. And standing in the center of it all was Marcus Thorn himself. He was exactly as he appeared in magazines, impeccably dressed, radiating an aura of calm power and confidence. "David," Thorn said, striding forward with a warm, firm handshake. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I'm Marcus." His charm was disarming, immediately putting David at ease. Thorn spoke with a passionate energy, not about profits or mergers, but about a vision. "What we're doing here, David, is streamlining global progress," he said, gesturing to the city sprawling below them. "We have a brilliant German pharmaceutical company on the verge of a breakthrough and a state-of-the-art Chinese manufacturing partner ready to produce it at scale. But they speak different languages, not just literally, but culturally, technically. You are the bridge. This deal will change the face of modern medicine, and you are a crucial part of it." It was intoxicating. For the first time in years, David felt like his skills mattered, that he was part of something important, not just a cog in a machine translating instruction manuals. He was led to a small glass-walled office within the larger space. A secure, top-of-the-line laptop sat on the desk. Thorn explained the procedure. David would be given access to 2 separate encrypted data rooms. One contained the German research documents. The other held the Chinese manufacturing logs and reports. His job was to translate and synthesize them. "Precision and discretion, David," Thorne said, his hand on David's shoulder, his tone now serious. "They are all that matter." For the first few days, the work was exactly as described: dense, challenging, and utterly absorbing. He immersed himself in complex chemical formulas from the German team and detailed production schedules from the Chinese facility. Everything was clean, professional, and seemingly legitimate. He pushed aside the lingering unease, focusing on the numbers in his contract, translating them into months of security for Lily, into the easy breath in her lungs. He was just the bridge, he told himself. He just had to translate the words, and the rest wasn't his concern. The final day felt like walking into the heart of a storm. The air in Thorne's penthouse was static, charged with unspoken knowledge. David's every keystroke seemed to echo in the cavernous silence. He knew Thorne was watching him, not on a hidden camera anymore, but with the hawk-like intensity of a king surveying a traitor in his court. Chris's words from the night before were a mantra in his head. We need something undeniable. That something was the money. The financial transfers were the final link in the chain, the one piece of evidence that couldn't be explained away as a clerical error or a scientific revision. He found them buried in a subfolder labeled Logistical Expenses, a deliberately bland title for a viper's nest of shell corporations and offshore accounts. It was a masterpiece of financial deception, a web stretching from Delaware to the Cayman Islands, designed to wash the profits from Project Nightingale clean. He worked methodically, his fear a cold, hard stone in his gut, copying the routing numbers and transaction codes to his encrypted USB drive. Each line of data was another nail in Thorne's coffin. The final file was copying, the progress bar creeping across the screen, when a shadow fell over his desk. "I hired you for your precision, David," Marcus Thorne said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it held none of its previous warmth. "I had no idea your diligence extended so far beyond your job description." David didn't turn around. He kept his eyes fixed on the screen. "You lied," he said, his own voice tight. "The documents were a lie." "No," Thorne corrected, stepping around the desk to face him. The charm was gone, stripped away to reveal the cold, hard machinery beneath. They were a narrative, a story of success. You were simply meant to translate it, not rewrite it. He leaned against the desk, a predator at ease. "Do you have any idea how many lives are lost every year waiting for the FDA to approve a drug that's already been proven to work? Bureaucracy is the disease, David. Red tape is the killer. I cut through it. The people we lost in the Nightingale trials are tragic, yes, but they are sacrifices for the greater good. Their loss will be measured against the millions of lives my drug will save. I am accelerating progress." He was about to push the files away, to draft the call to Elena admitting defeat, when a soft knock came at his door. It was Elena herself, her face etched with concern. She wasn't there to ask for an update. In her hands, she held a large thermos and a paper bag. "I can still make this right," Thorne said, his voice dropping. "For you, for Lily." He named a figure, a sum so vast it seemed unreal. "Enough for the best doctors, the best schools, a life without a single worry. All I need is that flash drive. Just be a translator, David. Translate this whole ugly business into a success story. It's what you were hired to do." The progress bar hit 100%. Safely eject hardware. David's job was to translate. He looked at Thorne, at this man who translated human lives into acceptable losses, who translated fraud into philanthropy. He thought of Patient 7. He thought of Lily, carefully drawing her hidden smiley faces, finding joy and truth where others only saw bricks and mortar. His own job was to reveal meaning, not to obscure it. He pulled the USB drive from its port. "She deserves an honest world," he said quietly. Thorne's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "You just made a terrible mistake." David's thumb found the side of his phone in his pocket, pressing the power button 3 times, the prearranged signal to Chris. "No," David said, meeting the millionaire's gaze. "I'm just finally doing my job." The chaos that followed was a blur. The penthouse doors burst open, and suddenly, the sterile office was filled with the shouts of federal agents. Thorne didn't resist. He stood, ramrod straight, as they cuffed him, his eyes locked on David with a look of pure, undiluted hatred. David wasn't hailed as a hero. He was escorted to a separate unmarked car and driven to a gray, featureless federal building. For 6 hours, he was questioned by 2 detectives who did not see him as a whistleblower, but as a potential accomplice who had broken a dozen federal laws to access and steal proprietary data. His motives were questioned, his methods scrutinized. The encrypted USB drive, his hard-won proof, was taken as evidence in a case that was now as much about him as it was about Thorne. When he was finally released into the pre-dawn chill, his world had been irrevocably altered. The story exploded, but his name was kept out of it, a footnote in a sealed affidavit. In the small, insular world of corporate translation, however, the story spread like a virus. He was the man who broke the cardinal rule. He had violated an NDA. He was radioactive. The lucrative job offers vanished. The agencies that had once courted him now wouldn't return his calls. Thorne's wealth bought him a legal team that moved with terrifying speed and efficiency. They filed motions to have David's evidence dismissed as fruit of the poisonous tree. They painted him in the press, through anonymous sources, as a disgruntled contractor, a corporate spy with a personal vendetta. The clear moral victory David had imagined dissolved into the messy, ambiguous reality of the legal system. Months passed. The seasons turned. David and Lily's life was a quiet struggle. The money from Thorne Enterprises, the portion he had earned before the end, was a dwindling resource, carefully rationed to cover Lily's mounting medical bills and their simple living expenses. The high-paying jobs were gone. He was back to translating obscure academic papers and dense historical texts for universities. The pay barely enough to keep them afloat. Their life was not fixed. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was sitting on a park bench watching Lily. She was running, chasing a cascade of yellow leaves stirred up by the wind. Her laughter was less strained, her breath coming more easily. The treatments were working. That, at least, was real. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Chris. It didn't say "we won," it said, "It's a start." Below the text was a link to a news article. The headline read, "Nightingale Victims Fund established amidst ongoing Thorne fraud trial." It spoke of a long, uncertain legal battle ahead, but it was the first concrete step toward justice for the families, funded by Thorne's provisionally seized assets. A gust of wind sent the leaves swirling around Lily, and she threw her head back, her face pure joy. David watched her, the ache in his chest, not one of fear anymore, but of a quiet, fierce pride. He hadn't won a grand victory. He hadn't changed the world. He had simply traded a comfortable lie for a difficult truth. He had learned to look closely, past the noise and the fear, to find the hidden things. The sound of his daughter's easy laughter, the warmth of the autumn sun on his face, the small, persistent hope of a battle just beginning. It wasn't the life he had dreamed of, but it was an honest one. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.
Thank you for taking a quiet moment with us. Every story is a journey, and we're so glad you joined us for this one.
We believe stories are a way to connect, even when we're apart. If you felt a connection to this tale, we invite you to subscribe and become part of our growing circle.
Our question for you today is, what's a simple moment of peace you've experienced this week?
Share it in the comments. Let's fill this space with serene moments.
Until the next story, be well.